Welcome to another episode of the Sport Management Office Hours. Brandon Podgorski and I are here, and we are ready to welcome in Heather Alderman, the Executive Director of COSMA. Heather, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me.
And why don't we start off with a very basic question, easy for you to answer at least, which is, what is COSMA?
Well, COSMA is the acronym for the Commission on Sport Management Accreditation, and it is the only specialized accrediting body for sport management degree programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels. So it is a measure of quality assurance for programs and for students.
Okay, and we've talked about Brandon and I have talked about this with a few other people, obviously not on the podcast. And COSMA is unique, at least in my opinion, in that it's not a minimal threshold type accreditation. It
Right.
is. Can you kind of go into that a little bit further?
Right. A lot of accrediting bodies use what are called standards, which is the normal language that you might hear. And those often have bottom levels of where you would meet a bottom threshold, like you need 2 faculty, you need these courses, you need to hit this benchmark. But we use principles which are based on outcomes, not inputs. So we don't say you should have 2 faculty and you should have these classes. We say you need to be able to have the number of faculty that enables you to provide the best sport management education for your students, given the resources you have and given the context in which you are doing your jobs. And we say these are areas that should be covered in a sport management bachelor's degree program. So you can cover those areas in whatever way you need or want to with your curriculum. And so we have a way that a program evaluates itself basically against its own mission and against its context, instead of against a program that's completely different or in a totally different geographic area with totally different resources. So it's based on those principles, not on these minimum standards.
Yeah, so it's less about checking boxes and more about excellence
Yes,
and performing. Okay.
yes,
Yes.
exactly.
Is there
Yes.
is there a reason Cosma did that? Is there something unique about sport management? Because I know sometimes, sport management, it could get stuck anywhere in a college, whether it's
Yes.
business or PE or general study or whatever, or humanities.
Yeah.
And sometimes our faculty can be a little bit smaller as compared to other places on
Right.
campus.
Yes, there is a general origin for most sport management programs, which is physical education and in colleges of education. And as we've seen over the last 20 to 25 years, many of those programs have moved to schools of business. So that's one side of the equation. But in its inception, COSMA wanted to be as flexible as possible. This discipline does not have any common components that everyone has to know. It is quite variable, and the jobs that you can have when you graduate or when you finish graduate school are pretty varied. So they really needed to be able to accommodate as many different programs as possible. And this is not a required accreditation, it is voluntary. So how do we attract programs to want to go through this process where they're spending money and mostly they're spending time to better their programs? And so it needs to be something that enables the small rural college to be able to meet the same principles as a urban R1 institution. So that's the concept behind it.
Okay, and a quick pivot, because we will go deeper into the whole accreditation process, but
Right.
you and I have spoken about this in the past, that COSMA may have started off as we are an accrediting body,
Mhm.
but it is kind of morphing into more than that. And I'd
It
love for you to
is.
discuss what else COSMA is doing outside of just accrediting, because obviously the
Yes.
pool for attracting people to go after accreditation is relatively small. However, the pool of sport management faculty out there is rather large. So if you
Right.
could expand on that.
We, at this point, we are offering a annual conference. So that's a place where faculty can present research and best practices. So it offers them networking and a place to, put that information on their CVs, which will lead to tenure and promotion. We have our own journal, which just started about a year ago. That's a big new development that was in the works for about 10 years, because that's a huge undertaking. But that's, again, a place where faculty need places to be able to submit their articles to get published. So we're offering another option in the marketplace. We have a lot of regular discussions around all kinds of timely issues in sport management and in the world of higher education. We had a esports management summit last year, so that's a new major. It's also just teams that are happening on various college campuses. We've had sessions on using AI in the classroom. Obviously, that's a really big deal, both to limit it and also to utilize it in a way that's effective. We also talk about moving presentations into publications to try to assist faculty in that aspect of their requirements that they have. And, you know, young faculty or junior faculty who've never done that or who are new to it may be able to write the abstract and then give the presentation, but then how do they move that along almost in a pipeline so that they can then begin to publish as they need to. We also offer money in the form of grants and scholarships for students. Those are limited, but they're there as well. And we do have a student honor society, so it's a chance for only the accredited programs to nominate some of their students into that society. And we just, in general, try to promote creativity and innovation in teaching and learning. And really, it's to assist the professional development of the faculty. So we have bylaws, and those have goals, and so we use the goals to help shape what other offerings that we have, so that we can meet those goals and meet the needs of the faculty, which is really what we're trying to do.
Brandon, I'll pitch it over to you because you're a little bit less familiar with the inner workings of COSMA. And I would love for you, so you've heard all this. And so obviously accreditation, that's the obvious one, right? But what does it sound like to you in a nutshell that all of these other these extra type of tasks and efforts, what does it all sound like to you?
Well, I love how Heather said sport management. There's no real kind of standard curriculum. It really kind of varies from school to school. And I think we've all seen that. I mean, I have to be a little bit cagey, but as I'm theoretically working on a non-existent program that might become existent one day, COSMA is a great framework to use as we build that out. Now, I might not be able to put in every single standard just with institutional type of restraints, but it's like, where do you go to find out what makes a good curriculum? So I think COSMA has been really, really helpful in that. I guess a question, and I don't think we prepared this for you, so if it's out of left field and you need a minute, think about it. But I'll be selfish. So as a young faculty member myself, as I'm finishing my doctorate right now, I'm not doing research, but I've got a lot of practical experience, and I've been in higher ed teaching for, over a decade. So for young faculty like me who do want to go for promotion one day, but haven't been able to get to that research level yet, just because maybe they're finishing their studies or maybe they're at a teaching institution and not a research institution, what are some ways that we could get involved in programs or in conferences where we could present or just kind of add our expertise to the body of knowledge?
Well, something that's important to me as the director of this organization is to ensure that there's a diversity of individuals who can participate and who are in leadership positions in the organization. So yes, you can absolutely submit abstracts to the conference, and then you can present. So you get practice creating an abstract, going through that review process. And we try to have those reviewers provide feedback on the abstract, because some abstracts are short and not very well written. And we might, instead of just rejecting that abstract outright, we might say, please rewrite this or give us more information. And so we try to turn it into a learning process. And then we try to accept as many abstracts as we can. And then what I'm actually going to be doing in January is moderating a panel of faculty who are going to talk about how do you turn that abstract into the presentation. And so for most conferences, you have maybe 20 minutes, 25 minutes, 30 minutes. So you have this short period of time to jam in all of the elements of your presentation. So that panel is going to address some tips and some tricks to make that presentation effective and engaging. And it's not set in any sort of a specific template, because each of those faculty people are going to talk about how they do it. So you'll get the people who participate or who view the recording can get some ideas. So we're trying to teach those skills that you might need as a young faculty person as you go along the way. And then, of course, when you go to the conference and you do present, then that'll be an experience. And our conference's culture is not one to criticize or to leap upon gaps in your methodology or your presentation skills. It's more to give you encouragement and maybe to give you some tips about how you might present something. Maybe you also during that conference would meet other faculty who are either working on similar things or who are interested in that, and then you can collaborate with them. So the whole of the experience is supposed to help. And I want to just quickly go back to the leadership element. I also strongly encourage individuals, especially if they have an interest, of course, in the accreditation process, to run for leadership positions on one of our 2 boards. So we have a board of directors, which handles our operations and policy. It's a lot more big picture and finances and where are we headed and strategic planning. And then our board of commissioners are the ones that make the accreditation decisions. So that's really getting into the nitty-gritty details of programs, responses to all of those principles that I was briefly talking about, and really looking at programs, outcomes assessment plans. And we can certainly talk more about the specifics of the accreditation process as much as you want or as little. But that, I think, is a really positive way for a faculty person to get some service in. You're meeting the rest of the board members, you're working with them, and you're really getting to know that accreditation process, which honestly just helps those faculty improve their own programs, which is, of course, another great benefit.
I was
Excellent.
just listening to a podcast by you'll know Matt Hummel, the
Mhm.
State of Sport Management, and it was I think it was a few months old, and he was interviewing the original editor for Sport Management Review.
Mm.
And what struck me was that in the very beginning of SMR, they refused to do desk rejections. And
Yes.
instead their reviewers worked very hard to kind of educate these people and help them get their studies to a level that were publishable. And
Yes.
I see the parallels between what they've done and what COSMA's doing here of really trying to elevate the field for teachers, for educators, and
Right.
pull everybody up together and elevate the entire field as a whole. And so, it's just as much about professional development and community and networking as it is about accreditation.
Exactly. Thank you for saying that, because that is the philosophy of our journal at this time. And there are manuscripts going back and forth multiple times, not because of rejection, but because of needing a lot of support and needing a lot of guidance, following APA guidelines,
Mhm.
saying it's one type of manuscript when in fact it's kind of another type of manuscript. And it sounds basic, but teaching, how do you write in a way that's already in this format that you're going to have to put it in? How do you classify properly what you're writing about? How do you then narrow maybe what you're writing about so that it is more clear to express to the journal and to the audience that's going to read it? So
Mhm.
I like that
Especially,
parallel.
yeah, and especially in sport management, I work with a couple international researchers, and they're so focused on high impact journals, and I
Yeah,
understand why, because their
Mm.
universities put that emphasis there.
right.
But for many of us who are more practical than theory, we've worked in industry and then moved to the classroom and use our experiences. Research is the second most important thing to us. And so
Yeah.
having a way to get those things for promotion, to elevate ourselves,
Mhm.
that's very important. And so COSMA really is a place where the teaching professional or someone at a teaching college can thrive and
Right.
elevate, but that doesn't mean people that are already established can't benefit as well. So that's
Agreed.
just something I've noticed in my short time working with you, Heather.
Mhm.
So I would love to move forward a little bit, and can you kind of give us the 1,000-foot view, and we'll get into details, but a 1,000-foot view of the accreditation process, because I know It's different for every institution slightly, but there is a general path to take.
Right. There are steps. And so I work with each program to go through those, to the level at which they need assistance. So there is a program membership technically where you just join and say, we're at an institution that is legally allowed to confer degrees, which both of yours are, of course, and most of them are in the United States. And then the next step is candidacy status. And I do often work with programs through that step before they join. I try to help people save money. So when they talk to me, I say, let's work on this together and then join as you're submitting that, because it gets you a little bit farther in the process and saves a little bit of money. So that step is to develop or to show what outcomes assessment plan the program has. And for those that have one, there may be some adjustments to make it better. And then for those that don't have it, it's a chance to develop it. And really, candidacy status is a conversation between the program and then our Board of Commissioners that makes the accreditation decisions. And the point is to educate the program about the process. So outcomes assessment is the cornerstone. And so it's to really develop a strong and robust plan, because it's with that data and from that data that programs can make all kinds of decisions or notice all kinds of gaps in student knowledge or strength areas where students are really showing that they know a lot or can do a lot. So it's an important focus. And then from there, once candidacy status is granted, the program is allowed to write their self-study document. So this is based off of 7 principles and some what we call self-study guidelines, which are basically just questions that address each of those 7 principal areas. So they write that rather large document. And then once that is completed and it is approved of by me, I would say that it just means it's complete. I'm not giving a really good deep dive review. That's the next step. The next step is a site visit with 2, generally it's with 2 peer site reviewers for a 2-day visit. And so that is the chance for the team who is outside of the program. Maybe one of them is from a similar institution and one is not. So there's a little bit of both like and not like going to that site visit. They're validating the self-study. They're making sure that what was written is accurate, but they're really linking together interviews with students, faculty, upper administrators, deans, and up to the president, maybe alumni, advisory boards, whoever the stakeholders are, and really trying to synthesize their points of view so that they can help make connections to improve the program that the program itself may not see because they're involved in it. And so that is also kind of a collaborative and collegial process to help improve the program. Of course, sometimes there are areas that we call non-compliant, that are not in compliance with the principles, but it is a chance to improve upon those areas. But then it's also the chance to put the icing on the cake, so to speak, and really make changes. And then once all of those materials have been put together, so we're talking about a self-study, a site visit report, and any sort of response or rejoinder from the program, then the Board of Commissioners makes an accreditation decision. So hopefully that's a lot of words, but that's about as nutshell as I can do it.
That's perfect. And I will reiterate that the website does kind of walk you through those steps as well, but it is good to hear it from you instead, because it's a lot of words on the website too. So it's good to hear it. And before we get into the next thing, which is kind of off the cuff, and I want to see how both of us individually might approach accreditation with our specific programs. I do want to mention that you do have Zoom trainings for accreditation.
Right.
Which, can you speak to how often those are?
I try to hold it's once a year that I will have a series. And so I go from kind of soup to nuts with the accreditation process. And that's generally in the fall. So October, let's say, that was what I did most recently. And they are both live. Individuals are listening and maybe asking questions, which I think is very beneficial, not only for the live listener, but the one who's watching the recording. And then they're available for anyone to look at. And then we have our conference, which is generally at the end of January or beginning of February. And I also do a couple of trainings there. Plus, I'm just there in person. So I just end up talking to people and making small appointments to talk to them about their specific program. But even when I give a presentation, it's the most useful when someone says, my program has this, this, and this. And so I talk it through. So I'm talking to that person, but I'm also generalizing that information across programs. So it can really benefit anyone. So I do welcome you to ask specifics about your programs.
Yeah,
Because
well,
it will
that's
help.
perfect. That rolls perfectly into what I was going to do, which is let's talk about our own programs because they are similar in many ways, but they are also unique. And so if this goes horribly wrong, Pod will cut this out, but I think it'll be fine. And so
Okay.
without giving too much information, Pod, I'll go first and then you can take a stab at this. So obviously, what type of information would you need to know, at the beginning of this conversation, Heather, that would allow you to kind of help guide the conversation?
About the accreditation process in general.
Or for my, like, if I were to say, listen, I have this
Oh,
program, I want to go after accreditation, what
okay.
would kind of be the first questions that you would ask me?
I would say, do you already have an outcomes assessment plan? That would be my first question. And it could be no, we don't have that. What is that? Okay.
Yeah.
Then I kind of know where you're starting. And usually someone says, this is a very common one, and maybe that you can relate to this. I'm the only faculty member. I don't know if I can do this. So then
Mhm.
we start there, and I say, you can. It's not like it's
Yeah.
going to be fun or maybe
Right,
easy,
right. Well,
but
and
you can.
to your point, I am the only full-time faculty member with about 75 students.
Yeah.
We do have obviously adjuncts as well.
Yes.
And this would be a labor of love and a passion project. There wouldn't be any release time, at least at my institution, for this project.
Mhm.
But that being said, we are always interested. This is a conversation we've had briefly before in the past that we are interested. We like the idea of pursuing accreditation. We just don't know how practical it is. And I'm sure that's something you've heard before.
Yeah.
And so I guess, how would you kind of encourage someone like myself, or even, we have a good friend, Josh Greer, who very same boat,
Yeah.
is thinking about it, very similar institution, also only full-time person, how would you kind of get us on board to say you can do this, or you should, or maybe you're saying we shouldn't yet. So kind of,
Right.
what's your kind of standard reaction to someone in my situation?
Well, I would say that just starting the process and going through the initial steps is going to benefit your program. It is because it is an assessment of all different areas of your program, and it can be done at a pace that's going to suit you or is going to fit into all of the responsibilities that you have. In other words, a lot of people say, well, once I'm accredited, what's the ROI? And I say, well, some of that ROI actually starts the moment that you contact me and we start working on this together. And that is a little bit harder to capture. And so I'm certainly trying to do that, of course. But that development, say, of an outcomes assessment process is a systematic look at what are the goals of the program and how am I going to assess students in those goals. So if you're not doing that, which is not terrible, it is putting you in a position to think about it that way. And so you may not even have a mission for your program. What have you really thought about? What do I want students to know and be able to do at the end of the program? And so what does that look like? What is this ideal graduate? And so from that mission statement, you can work backwards and say, well, marketing is really important to our program, just as an example. So I'm going to write a student learning outcome that's related to marketing skills or marketing knowledge or the application of marketing knowledge. And I want to measure that. And I want to, I can measure that in all these different ways. So I can go into more detail about what the outcomes assessment plan looks like, but that in and of itself, just thinking about it that way might change how you're approaching what you're doing.
Yeah,
So
let's focus on
yeah,
the end game and more about the process as well.
yeah,
Yeah. And so for someone like me whose program has been around for a decade, there is some data to be had. If
good.
I were to start today, what would kind of be a reasonable time frame on my path to let's say just the accreditation decision, not necessarily being accredited?
Okay. Yeah, we can work backwards from
Mhm.
when the Board of Commissioners meets. That's one way to look at it. So they meet twice a year to make accreditation decisions, and that's not a barrier, but it's a structure within which this process works. So you could say, I'd like to be accredited by 2027. So then we could say, okay, 3 months prior to that, you need to have a site visit. So
Mhm.
that's the next, we're going backwards. 3 months prior to that, you need to submit your self-study. So there's 6 months there. And then how long it takes you to write your self-study, that's up to you. And how long you take to gain that candidacy status, that's a little bit up to you as well. So 12 to 15 months,
Okay.
15 to 18 months. I do give these numbers because that's about right. Candidacy status can last for up to 5 years. That's a long time. And you might think, why would a program do that? Well,
Sounds like dissertation status.
yeah, right, right. I think that it happens like that where many things might get in the way. You
Mhm.
might, your institution might get a new president. And so you thought you were on this path strategically, and now you're going to have to shift, which will change what you do in your program or what focus you have in your program. We know that these things are happening in COSMA, and we want to know what's happening now. And you are providing us snapshots along the way, but that is where each of the steps you are able to update the site reviewers or the Board of Commissioners in order for them to make a decision about what's happening now, not what happened 2 years ago, because that's not going to help you as much.
And you've told this to me before, but to share with everybody, how much data collection, I think you've said before the number of semesters that we need to track this data at a minimum. Obviously, more is always great. And if you already, some of this overlaps with general accreditations that your either School of Business or School of Education might have, you can borrow
Right.
and
Yes.
steal from those accreditations. But
Right.
what is the general amount of data that I need to collect or track to appease the standards and the
Right, to
accreditation
meet
process?
the
Yeah.
minimum. And then we do have some minimums. So, I talked about standards and principles, but we have some minimum standards.
Yeah.
Well, your self-study document will contain about 1 year or one cycle of data. And I say cycle because some programs will not measure all of their student learning outcomes in 1 year. They might do it over 2 years or more. And so they would need one full cycle of data. So that's pretty small, actually, because
Mhm.
as I said, it's a snapshot. You will be providing an annual report after you are accredited, or even if you are not yet accredited and candidacy status. So you are representing to the Board of Commissioners what that data is on an annual basis, even if it's a different cycle. And so I guess that I'm answering your question about
Yeah.
what you're documenting, but also it's not that you just do that and then 7 years later you have another snapshot of 1 year. It is every year, and there is continuous improvement, and that annual
Right.
report is important.
Right. You need to set up the process so that
Right.
it can just repeat itself. But
Exactly.
if
Yeah.
it's not already in place, you need to set that up. And so
Right.
I guess I'll pitch that over to Pod now, who he's in a brand new program with no history,
Mhm.
and it's masters only at the moment. Right. And I'll let Pod take it.
Acceptable.
Pod, you can take it from there on your end.
Okay. So I think as I hear this, or if I was a faculty member hearing this, I don't know, even at a program that's established, my kind of hesitancy in possibly doing COSMA accreditation, it's like, oh no, I may have to change classes, take classes out, add new classes. How often do you see that happening when schools go through accreditation to meet the program framework or the standards?
Right. I think the perception is that you have to put in and take out classes. The reality is rarely do you actually do that. You are, because the evaluation is the content that's across all of those sport management core classes, you may be surprised that you are covering, it's about covering everything. And there are some areas in our common professional component areas that don't get as much coverage, but that's expected because again, it's about the context of your program. Perhaps for you, it would be, it's new and you are establishing yourself and trying to figure out what your niche is. So as long as you're covering those areas, we don't say what classes you have to have. And programs often will, on their own, through this process, which I think is exactly its purpose, find out what classes they might need to add some content to, or that they actually want to add a new class about some topic or another, partly to get to stay current or to offer something that the students want, but also to fulfill those basic requirements.
And Pod, I'll jump in
So
real
if-
quick
Yeah,
that
go ahead, please.
it's less about do you have XYZ classes, It's here are the components, like maybe sports sociology or DEI or whatever it might be. And that could be a part of several classes, but not be its own class. And
Correct.
so me doing my own studying of the accreditation process led me to see, like, you can have your components. And it can be packaged in different ways. And
Right.
not to get overly into the weeds, but there's the number of hours you might spend on that as a component
Right.
of that course. So like there are ways to
And-
do that.
And when you do go through the process of evaluating the content of your curriculum, you may double count hours. So you may be talking about sport communications and DEI at the same time, or, governance and marketing at the same time, or triple counting. So in other words, your content, we understand, is not singular or just about one topic. It probably is about multiple topics. And so in that way, you are actually covering all of those common professional component areas, and you may have not thought about it that way. And that's one benefit of this process, is to kind of jumble that up a little bit and make it less about this course, that course, and the other course.
Yeah, to kind of go back to what we were talking about, let's say if a program's in the School of Business, like my last institution I taught at, the sport management program was in the School of Business. And frankly, it was really, really business heavy. We had like 5 sport management classes, but for the most part, it was
Right.
pretty business heavy. So, as one of those components being marketing, and again, it's going to differ institution to institution, but broadly, if marketing was being covered under the School of Business with a business class, could that fit hypothetically one of those components?
I think that's a great question, because my answer is a little bit no, because
Mm-hmm.
sport marketing is very different from generic business marketing. And I'm not trying to diss any business people. It doesn't mean it's better or worse. It's just that marketing in the sport industry is a very specific thing. That industry is different. So what we do, so that's where some of this flexibility comes in. There's a bit of, say, negotiation, but not
Mhm.
to overly emphasize also this particular principle that you're talking about, the common professional component areas. There are many ways that that program can then describe what they're doing. So we do have a 20% minimum percentage of the total credits for the degree program. So this is only at the bachelor's level. I know right now your current program is at the master's level, and I'll say there are no common professional component requirements for it. And that may be a separate discussion. So just for bachelor's degree, if you're in a business school and there's a strong business core, those say 5 sport core classes, does that meet that minimum 20%? Maybe it's 19 or 18%. That might be something to negotiate with the Board of Commissioners. Is that enough? Are we going to say, before you really go through this process, you need to add another sport focused class? Or can you can those sport management students go to that that marketing class in the business school and do all of their research or projects on sport industry? And could that count? Because then they are applying those principles in the area that they are supposed to be studying. That might be a way to manage that as well. So we work with those programs. Sometimes there is a big table in our self-study principles document that is where we talk about it. You see the numbers for all of these common professional component areas. And sometimes we will say, why don't you complete this table in 3 or 4 different ways? Add these classes, take out these classes. What are the combinations that might show what the student is learning? But then, if we stripped it all down to just sport, what does that look like? And just to get a different view on it. That's a little bit more work, but it's worth it to have that program understand, is this a business degree with a not enough, just a minor almost in sport, which we don't accredit, or is it really a major in sport management?
Yeah, I think that provides a lot of clarification there. And I think it takes a big objection off the table when you're trying to pitch this to possibly a dean or a VPAA who might come back and say, this seems a little rigid. Well, if we're looking at it kind of in the totality of everything, it's not that bad.
Right.
What about for what we're doing at Abilene Christian right now? Our focus is on sport leadership. So, I tend to think sport management is a pretty big umbrella that can accommodate whether it be sports marketing and management, leadership, analytics, all these things. Would you guys accredit a sport leadership program or sport marketing program or anything that might be sport related?
Yes, and we do, and we have. So there is a master's degree in sport leadership at Northeastern University in Massachusetts, and that is a sport management program. So we didn't talk about this. It's a little boring, but it's extremely important. We have a scope of accreditation. You know, what is sport management? What does COSMA accredit? And I've alluded to it a little bit in that we don't accredit minors or concentrations. We are accrediting bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and doctoral degrees. So we also, though, will look at programs in your university that have a sport prefix. And, you know, that is we need to look at it from the point of view of a student or a regular generic public individual who's going to your website and seeing what your college provides. And is there confusion about what might be accredited or what would not be accredited, what is sport management and what is not. Even within esport management, some of that is not sport management. It is about creating games and coding and doing something with computer science that is not sport management, no governance, and not, you know, some of these other areas. So the scrutiny about what's included or not is always discussed before the candidacy status application comes through. And there's, you know, I go to people's websites and I look around and I Google sport and see what comes up. So that's boring, but a very important part of the discussion so that we know what we're accrediting and so that really the public knows what's accredited or what's not accredited.
Excellent. Thank you.
Well, perfect. I think you've done an excellent job of describing what it is COSMA does, what kind of its mission is, and then also some very practical advice to people that are maybe asking themselves these questions of
Right.
why do this, what would it look like, and I would encourage anyone that's interested in learning more, because this is just this is like an appetizer of the accreditation process. But
Yeah.
if you're interested, you should check out the website. And which we will link. And then also I encourage you, even if you're not going after accreditation, this is the path that I took, become a member anyway and benefit from all of the extra services and professional development that it comes with, because that's a great way to just stay in the loop and keep hearing about accreditation. And I will tell you, it kind of nags at you to like, hey, you should look again, look again at accreditation, and which is not a bad thing. And then why don't we end the show by, you know, why don't you plug the conference coming up here? Because I know that that's the next big thing in COSMA, and we will all be in Las Vegas for that. So why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Right. Our next conference is January 29th through the 31st, 2025 in Las Vegas, Nevada, hosted by the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. We're very excited. We're just coming out with our preliminary program schedule, I believe, Friday of this week. So end of this week, sort of end of November. So you can see what presentations are going to be made. There, unfortunately, are no fun sporting events going on. UNLV is not playing a game or anything. We often try to do that because we have, fun times around the times that people are presenting. But we're going to open the conference with a reception and a dinner. We're not trying to make money on this conference. We're trying to just pay for the catering and other costs that we have. So we include as much food as possible so that your cost of attending is minimized. So it's just maybe hotel and your flight, that kind of thing. And then we are ending on Friday at noon because, of course, it's Las Vegas, and I just can't imagine anybody is going to stick around, if we were going into Friday night. But there's, so many other things to do there. And so we'll have some sponsors, which are, that's also going to be part of our preliminary program. And so those, if you have any sort of ancillary thing you want to add to any of your classes or into your program, we do have a few sponsors that we work with that can help you if you're interested in that kind of stuff. So it's exciting. It's always fun. And I think the best feedback I get is just that it's friendly, it's congenial. I've talked a lot about how it's kind of training ground for individuals who might need a little bit of extra help without being overly criticized. And there's a lot of great networking that happens. So I know that there are people that met last year and now they're presenting together this year, and I love that kind of thing. And it is a chance also to talk to me personally, which I always encourage, this is a part of my job, is just helping people understand the process and giving them that individual attention that they need. So that's another chance for that as well.
Well, Heather, I thank you very much for your time. I encourage you all, if you have questions for Heather, please reach out to her. If you have questions for us, reach out to us. All of the contact information is going to be in the description. And I encourage you to look at COSMA, because COSMA is more than just accreditation. That's
It is.
kind of what people definitely, I think the conversations I've had with people is they don't realize that there's so much more other than accreditation. So
Yes.
we're really hoping to push that narrative alongside you. So I look forward to seeing
you.
you in Vegas at COSMA, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.